Peace and welcome to my channel. I am Zinyeza, and tonight I want to talk about a very special character in the history of occultism, and one in which I encourage all melanated people to learn a little bit about, especially if you're the type of occultist that likes to find out about obscure magicians who were of your species. His name was Ahmad Al-Buni, and Ahmad Al-Buni was born in, I don't know his birthday, but he passed away in 1225 in Egypt, but he was born in Algiers, which is northwest Africa, very close to Spain and Morocco. He was a very well-known Sufi during his lifetime. Not much is known about his life or his upbringing. I've researched quite a bit seeking to find out about this information. If there is information out there, it must be in Arabic, and I don't know how to read Arabic at this time, so I'm limited in that capacity. But all the English writings say that there's not much documentation available to scholars as to what were the particulars of his life, as like what was his profession, etc., etc. But what is known about him is his contributions to the occult and spirituality, and who his associations were, who his teachers were. So let's get into what he did, who he was. Now, as I mentioned, where he was from and the era that he lived in, he is most known today for his production of a book called the Shams Al-Ma'arif Al-Kubra, which is Arabic for the Book of the Light of Gnosis. The Book of the Light of Gnosis. Ma'arif is Gnosis. And this book is considered the foremost book on talismans and amulets by contemporary scholars of the occult. The same way in which the Picatrix is seen as the foremost text on astrological magic, from which the European occultists of the Middle Ages gained their direct knowledge from. The Picatrix is a book that is said to have been written by another Moor in like the 900s, or let's just say documented by the Moors in the 900s, written by earlier Moors, of course, but this particular Moor was a part of a very obscure group called the Ikhwan al-Safa, which I covered in the very beginning of this channel. The Ikhwan al-Safa, which is an occult study group that was going on in the 900s. So this book, the Shams al-Ma'arif, is said to rival the Picatrix in its impact and in its influence. Well, I'll tell you this: the Picatrix was allowed to be translated, and you can still purchase it in Eastern countries where Islam is the predominant religion. The book Shams al-Ma'arif is not only banished from all Islamic countries. If you are seen with it in Arabia, it is a death penalty, according to various sources. Now, what are the contents of this book? What's in this book is knowledge of how to construct magic squares, utilizing also the 99 names of Allah, which in Sufism is a concept of extracting the 99 attributes which have been identified in the Quran as being exclusively titled to Allah, and invoking these names to gain the specific energetic power vested in the name. This is of course known as theurgy, the process of invoking the powers of gods in efforts to become one with that power. And he also talked about the science of letters and a special sort of sorcery that is said to have been developed by Ibn Arabi, another great Sufi master and sage of that time. Now, what's interesting is that Ahmad Al-Buni and Ibn Arabi, contemporaries, shared the same lineal teacher, had the same Sufi sheikh. Though there's no evidence as to whether or not they were personally acquainted, I personally feel they were, and it wasn't advantageous for Ibn Arabi to publicize such a relationship, because Ahmad Al-Buni was considered a sorcerer by certain Orthodox Muslims, and sorcery is in Islam shirk, forbidden, and therefore blasphemous. But Ahmad Al-Buni's argument was that he was not a sorcerer, but a ruhaniya, which means a spiritual practitioner, a practitioner of the hieratic spiritual arts of Islam, which required an esoteric interpretation other than the mere logical interpretation which the Orthodox Muslim suffices with. So, in addition to talismans, amulets, magic squares, and letter magic, as well as the 99 names of Allah, he is known for a few other things as well, and that would be his Qabalistic invocations. There is a PDF file that you can look up online called the Berhachia Conjuration Oath, and I'll put a link to that in the bottom. But in it, you can see that here is a document from either the early 1200s or the late 1100s of a Sufi invoking Kabbalistic names that relate to the Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, far before the Zohar or the Sefer Bahir was even published. So how did these men have knowledge of Sephiroth before the Sephiroth was even made known amongst the Jews, much less amongst the Sufis? Well, that is because the Sufis are the producers of the Kabbalah, and the Jews of the Middle Ages received the Kabbalah from the Sufis because they were just brothers anyway. The Jews of the Middle Ages was niggas. They were Moors. They had melanin in Spain, and it was just a camaraderie going on. If that statement is too short and non-explanatory, read the book The Sufis by Idris Shah, and he will show you in there, and it's also in the Jewish Encyclopedia from the 20th century, and it's documented that the Brethren of Purity transferred the Kabbalah to the Jews. So it's a very interesting document because you see just this old-fashioned style conjuration of Ahmad Al-Buni invoking the names of Allah, certain names I haven't even heard before, invoking names of the Tetragrammaton, Metatron, Ahia Asha Adonai, Tezavabot Al Shaddai, and he's also binding the jinn under his control. And he was very much concerned with goetic magic, invoking these demon forces to control them, or evoking them rather, binding them into, so that he can have power over the elements which these spirits are expressions of. The Shams al-Ma'arif has never been translated into English. I've tried to find it on countless occasions. I have it in an Arabic form. It's a book of over 600 pages, but it just goes to show the magnitude of its power, that no English writing speaking occultist has taken it into his hands to translate it. It's not like they don't know about it. It's very well known. In fact, Sufism is a highly ignored topic by Western occultists, and for good reasons, because they cannot wipe out the Moorish connection with it, and anything that they can't hijack and attempt to create this so-called Western tradition out of, they shy away from, and they just secretly and privately collect data. But the point is that this book is very interesting, and you can find various articles where you can get some information about Ahmad Al-Buni, which give you an insight, and you can work with him if you can contact him spiritually and learn what you can from him, just as I have. I learned from Ahmad Al-Buni the secret science of numbers, and he did not teach me specifically, but he sparked my deep investigation into the knowledge of the true occult significance of the very shapes of numbers, which I will be publishing in a book next year. Ahmad Al-Buni is a great magician, a mysterious man, and highly regarded by his fellow Sufis, and obviously a pioneer in the magical tradition of the Common Era, though he is not spoken of. He's not spoken of just like how Pascal Beverly Randolph isn't spoken of, but he's highly significant because there's no known books that we know of prior to him that they dealt with the magic squares on that level, and the talismans, and really just putting out there the specific science on themes which will be considered hoodoo today. You know, love spells, money spells, political spells to gain the approval of politicians, similar like the Picatrix, governors, etc., etc. But I'm going to leave some links in the bottom that the interested person may look into Ahmad Al-Buni and explore some of this interesting information and see what you think about Ahmad Al-Buni. To end this, I found out about Ahmad Al-Buni when I was doing research on Dhul Nun, who's another great Sufi master who was also known as an alchemist and a hermetist. And when I was reading about how various books say that Dhul Nun, who also grew up in Egypt, who was born in Egypt and grew up there, that he was secretly a magician and that Islam was a cover for him. And I get the feeling that for Ahmad Al-Buni it was the same thing, because you can't be this much interested in personal power if you have a basic religious mindset. And if you have an interest in personal power and are actively engaged in methodology to experience that, naturally you're going to progress beyond mundane dogmatic beliefs, and therefore you can no longer be contained within the confines of a moral system or of a system of rules and regulations which are based upon behavioral conduct, based upon morality, which is a social and superstitious ideology, not rooted in absolute fact or truth, whereas magic is definite. Not saying that magic is absolute, because the things that we're altering is ultimately an illusion. Reality, true reality, cannot be altered. It can only be experienced or entered into. But magic is science. Magic is as real as water is wet or as fire is hot. But the belief that you need to wipe your ass only with your left hand, or it is sinful or against so-called God, is immoral. It's a superstition. See the difference? So Ahmad Al-Buni, like Dhul Nun before him, Dhul Nun was born 796. Dhul Nun was a hermetist and was also very skilled in letters and actually knew how to decode Egyptian hieroglyphs. And there's a story about Ahmad Al-Buni that says that he once discovered a collection of Hermetic writings under an Egyptian pyramid and incorporated that into his works. He also regularly cited Hermes Trismegistus, Plato, and other sages of the past. So he was very well versed in occult knowledge and wasn't afraid of sharing it and talking about it, while all the while maintaining that he was a Muslim. So very fascinating character. And if you're interested, check out the links below. And I'll be dropping new information in the future. Thanks for listening. Peace.